Frankly, your position is obsolete, Darren declared, his voice smug enough to make a saltine cracker taste arrogant. 85 pairs of eyes locked on me like I'd just spilled hot coffee on the Constitution. The room, once buzzing with polite corporate adrenaline and weak decaf, went stone quiet. Even the HVAC vents above us seemed to hold their breath. I stood there, holding my clipboard like it might turn into a sword if I squeezed hard enough. He said it again, louder this time, as if humiliating me once wasn't enough. This division is being streamlined, and Linda's role is no longer aligned with our strategic roadmap. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. Hell, I didn't even blink. I just turned and walked to the only empty chair left, third row, far left, and sat down like I was watching a movie where the ending had already been spoiled. No one met my eyes. A few folks shifted in their seats like they had somewhere urgent to be but nowhere to go. One guy, Martin from Data Integration, actually winced. He'd just finished onboarding with me 2 weeks ago and probably still had the welcome packet in his inbox. I glanced around the room, watching Darren soak in his moment like he'd just slain a dragon, completely unaware that he'd just kicked a sleeping bear in the teeth. By the way, if you're still listening and you like these kinds of stories where the corporate snakes get what's coming, go ahead and hit that little subscribe button and throw a like while you're at it. It helps more than you'd think. Plus, I promise, the best part's still coming. After the meeting, I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't check my email. I didn't text anyone. I walked straight to the small, creaky file cabinet tucked inside the back of the storage room behind my old office, now Innovation Pod B, and opened the bottom drawer. That drawer hadn't seen the light of day in 3 years, not since our last federal renewal, but everything was still there. Hard copies of grant disbursements, my PI certifications, signed MOUs, a yellow sticky note in my handwriting that read, "In case they get stupid." Beneath it, the original grant application packet, unredacted, with one name typed clearly in bold on the front, mine. Let Darren have his little war drum. Let him parade his buzzwords and startup consultants and try to turn this place into some kind of half-baked tech accelerator. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't want to know, because knowing would mean realizing how utterly, laughably out of his depth he was. The thing about federal funding, real federal funding, not those PR grants he bragged about, is that it's not just money. It's authority. It's structure. It's legally binding terms, compliance protocols, agency contacts, audit trails, and, most importantly, named individuals responsible for execution. It's not the company that gets the money, it's the person, the principal investigator. And that person was me. Darren didn't even know what PI stood for. During a budget discussion a few weeks back, he called it private investigator and made a joke about trench coats. No one laughed, not even Barry from facilities, who laughs at anything. And now this fool had just tried to erase me in front of 85 staffers. He thought he'd won. Thought I'd fade quietly into the beige carpet like yesterday's toner cartridge. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't angry. I was prepared. Over the next few days, I didn't engage. I smiled. I nodded. I let HR schedule their little transition meetings. I let Darren pretend he was leading a revolution when he couldn't find the kitchen without Google Maps. Every time someone tried to loop me into an email thread, I gently replied that I was no longer in that role and referred them back to Darren. And then I BCC'd my personal account, just in case. I was the architect of this division. I built it from 3 staffers and a donated printer into a national education pipeline with 7 partner institutions and 2 federal renewals. I'd written the strategic vision Darren was now plagiarizing at every staff update. And I knew, deep in my marrow, that when the dust settled, the grant office wasn't going to care about Darren's buzzwords or slick haircut. They were going to care about one thing, whose name was on the grant. And spoiler alert, it wasn't his. I started with coffee. Not the office sludge they serve in the break room, but the real kind. The kind that stains your teeth and your soul, poured from a diner pot by a waitress who's seen some things. I met Elena there first. She used to be our grants compliance officer before she moved on to some think tank job in D.C. She sipped her coffee, took one look at Darren's org chart I'd discreetly slid across the table, and nearly choked on her cinnamon roll. "They removed you entirely?" she said, eyebrows vanishing into her bangs. "Page 7, I murmured. "That's where they moved my entire unit under digital community engagement, headed by Trent from marketing." Elena looked like someone had read her bad fan fiction aloud at a conference. You know he once tried to submit a grant to the Department of Education using Comic Sans? I did know. I'd seen the email. Saved it too. She flipped through the packet again, this time slower, lips pressed tight. They've got no idea what they're doing, do they? I shook my head. Worse, they think they do. By the end of that first week, I'd had 5 of these quiet coffees. Elena, Richard from Curriculum Design, Janine from the Outreach Bureau, Grace from the university's Research Foundation, and my old friend Frank, who now sat on the advisory board for the federal agency that actually wrote the grant Darren was about to detonate with a smile and a Slack emoji. They all told me the same thing in different words. They're playing house with live wires. What Darren didn't understand, what none of the new leadership team seemed remotely curious about, was that federal grants don't work like VC funding or a corporate credit card. They're woven out of rules, filings, timelines, reviews, and signatures. Mine, specifically. You can't just delete a principal investigator from an org chart and expect the universe to update itself. And yet, that's exactly what he was doing. At a town hall that Friday, Darren proudly unveiled the department's new direction in a 30-minute PowerPoint that somehow managed to use the word synergy 8 times and included a slide titled, "Disruption Starts With You." I sat in the back, flipping through a printed copy of the grant agreement like it was the gospel. That evening, I used my personal laptop to log into the federal compliance portal. My 2-factor key still worked. No one had revoked it. No one had even tried. And when I clicked into our department's renewal section, due in 8 weeks, I saw it. Only one person had been assigned submission privileges. One name. Mine. I stared at it for a long moment. Not with glee, not even relief. Just a weird kind of exhaustion, like I'd been shouting into a hurricane for months and finally saw the eye of the storm. And Darren? Darren was off giving interviews to thought leaders in edtech, talking about breaking silos and flattening vertical hierarchies. Meanwhile, the only thing he'd actually managed to flatten was our chain of responsibility. He had no idea that each of those flattened teams was tied to a unique funding stream, and each stream was tethered to a compliance clause. You mess with those without updating the portal, you're not just reorganizing. You're committing a reportable violation. Back-channel chatter confirmed it. The agency hadn't received any of the required role transition forms. Darren hadn't even scheduled a call with them, hadn't asked who the authorized signers were, hadn't requested PI transition protocols. Nothing. And Grace, God bless her, forwarded me a meeting agenda she wasn't supposed to have access to. Q3 strategic realignment, removing legacy oversight bottlenecks. That was me. I was the bottleneck, the one keeping their little startup cosplay from running wild with government dollars. Simmering betrayal doesn't feel like rage. It feels like caffeine behind your eyes and a spreadsheet in your soul. I didn't cry. I didn't vent. I started building timelines, saved every email, every internal memo, every folder Darren had removed my name from. And when one of his interns, bright-eyed poor kid, slipped up in a Slack thread and asked me how to access the agency's reporting system, I replied with 6 words. That access is currently PI restricted. Nothing else. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. Let them Google what a PI even is. 8 weeks. TikTok. I bought a second flash drive, not because I was running out of room, the first still had gigabytes free, but because some part of me wanted a backup for my backup. Paranoia is just experience with a good filing system. And I wasn't taking chances, not with the way Darren's plans were accelerating like a teenager on Dad's sports car, ignoring the blinking oil light and the burning smell from the engine. I started small, pulled every email from my inbox with the word realignment, restructure, or my personal favorite, sunset. Nothing good ever gets sunsetted in corporate America unless it involves your access badge and a cardboard box. Then I archived the full list of active team members tied to our grant. Names, roles, salaries, compliance clearances. I printed the org chart from 6 months ago. Then again from yesterday. My name had been moved so far to the side, it was practically falling off the page like a rejected sticky note. They thought I'd just quietly fade, but I didn't. I documented. When I opened our shared drive, I noticed they'd renamed the federal funding folder. It used to be EID Grant Ops. Now it was Innovation Funding 21C. I laughed out loud. That's how you know someone's trying to look smart. They slap 21st century on things like they just invented electricity. They didn't even move the files, just renamed the top-level directory and pretended it was a whole new system. So I downloaded everything, even the subfolders they didn't know mattered. Audit logs, training rosters, procurement approvals. Darren had told staff to stop using clunky templates and instead rely on a new productivity app with animated unicorns. Unicorns don't stand up in audits. Then I did something he never would have thought of. I scheduled a meeting with the agency. Technically, it was just an informational interview, a check-in, a courtesy call. I wore a plain gray blazer and didn't touch my coffee. The compliance officer on the other end, Margie, mid-50s, glasses sliding down her nose, looked up from her notes halfway through and narrowed her eyes. "Wait, did you say they removed the listed PI?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "In the internal org chart, yes." "Did they file a transition letter?" "No." Margie blinked. That's a reportable violation." I just sipped my water. "And you're still logging in under your PI credentials?" "I am." "Well then, technically, you're still the only authorized party. Any use of funds or staff reallocation without your sign-off isn't just out of compliance. It could trigger a freeze. Are they aware?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That was the moment despair evaporated. It didn't happen with trumpets or tears, just that click in your chest when you realize you're not crazy. You're right, and they're the ones playing hopscotch in a minefield. When I got back to my desk, I changed my passwords. Every one of them. Then I added two-factor authentication to the agency portals and the backup access server. Darren had tried to route all reporting through his new operations manager, a woman who once asked me if accrual was a spreadsheet formula, but her login triggered an instant rejection from the system. She wasn't listed. She couldn't submit. She didn't even have read-only access. I began archiving files off-site, not deleting, just mirroring. Every memo, every Slack message, every time-stamped video from the webinars I'd hosted on compliance protocols, now being ignored. I labeled them with calm, boring titles like Q2 Restructure Memo, Legal Review, and Staff, Reassignments, Grant Conflict. Boring is what buries you in an audit. It's the dull stuff that detonates careers. The funny thing? Darren still thought he was winning. Still strutting around, still making decisions with a Sharpie and a dream. He sent out a campus-wide update titled Phase 2, Unleashing Potential, where he literally used the phrase, torch the old playbook. Meanwhile, I was holding the actual playbook, signed and notarized, recognized by a federal agency that does not, ever, play games. He had no idea the game was already over, and I wasn't making moves. I was just building the receipt drawer. The week the consultants arrived, everything started to rot from the inside. They came in packs, slim suits, glowing teeth, and lanyards that looked like they came prepackaged with buzzwords. Agile, disruptive, lean-forward integration. You could practically smell the LinkedIn premium on them. Darren walked behind them like a proud golden retriever who thought he'd just discovered fire. He kept calling it a strategic infusion of next-gen thinking. I called it a circus where the elephants had MBAs. They didn't ask about our grant terms, didn't ask about deliverables, staff qualifications, or compliance benchmarks. No one mentioned the word PI. Instead, they held meetings called vision showcases, where they used color-coded sticky notes to diagram stakeholder synergy potential. At one point, I swear someone wrote, "Synergize the synergy," and got applauded for it. Meanwhile, the people who actually made this place run, curriculum leads, data analysts, field coordinators, were being shuffled around like playing cards in a game Darren didn't know how to play. Trent from marketing was suddenly overseeing educational access. Sarah, who had written half our original policy documents, was moved to community vibe lead. I don't even know what that means. Is that a job? A Spotify playlist? Staff morale plummeted so fast you could feel the gravity shift. The copy machine broke and no one even tried to fix it. Our best instructional designer started crying in the break room over a missing budget line. People who used to speak up in meetings now stared at their phones like they were waiting for divine intervention via push notification. And then, one by one, they started coming to me. They didn't knock. They just showed up. Quietly, awkwardly, like kids who broke a vase and weren't sure if mom was in a good mood. "Linda, are we still reporting to you, or—" I never gave a straight answer. I just handed them a printed copy of their role's funding clause from the grant appendix. Section 4.3, subsection C. Personnel assignments and supervisory structure must reflect compliance with approved oversight designations. I'd highlight the relevant line, slide it across the desk, look them in the eye. You might want to familiarize yourself with this. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was just letting gravity do its job. The thing is, when you're the only one who understands the rules, you don't need to play dirty. You just need to let the clock run. And Darren? Darren was trying to sprint through a chess match wearing clown shoes. He launched an initiative called Project Phoenix, like he was rebranding a soda, complete with a stylized bird logo and inspirational emails with subject lines like, "Rise with me." He started referring to himself in the third person. Darren believes in agility. Darren wants action. I don't think Darren believed in reading. At one point, he called an all-hands and unveiled a new innovation pyramid that put legacy oversight at the bottom tier labeled Obsolete Anchors. He looked directly at me when he said it. I smiled and clapped politely. Meanwhile, I was quietly routing all funding disbursement logs through my archived templates. I stopped correcting mistakes in the compliance tracker. Let Trent's assistant upload the wrong report format. Let the consultant submit a draft operating plan that used language copied from a California tech incubator. We're in education, in the Midwest, funded by the Department of Community and Rural Development. No one caught it, because no one knew what they were looking at. I did. I watched it unfold like a slow-motion derailment, and I didn't lift a finger. I didn't have to. Each day, another thread unraveled. A coordinator quit. A district partner asked why their invoices hadn't been processed. Someone noticed their travel reimbursement was missing. Little things at first, then not so little. And still, Darren strutted around like a man selling elevators in a building that had no floors. I had my binders. I had my access. I had the agency's auto-confirmation that I was still the listed PI. And I had time. Every tick of the clock wasn't just waiting. It was an alibi. The email landed at 7:48 a.m. Subject line, Leadership Restructure, Final Phase. I opened it without flinching. I'd been expecting it. Darren's digital signatures were always a little too proud. Bold font, oversized logo, the Director of Innovation Strategy title he gave himself beneath a motivational quote about disruption. This one was no different, except it had legal and HR looped in like they were guests at a wedding he forgot to RSVP for. Effective immediately, it read, Linda Carpenter will be transitioned into a legacy advisory role, with gratitude for her years of foundational service. As we align with new strategic frameworks, Linda will no longer hold operational authority or oversight within the division's current structure. Operational authority. That phrase sat there like a coffin lid. No one called me. No one scheduled a meeting. Just that email, surgical and smug. The gratitude part was what made me laugh, like tossing a bouquet onto a burning bridge. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, not because I was shocked, not because I was hurt, but because I could feel the moment solidify. This was it, the line they couldn't uncross. So I replied. One sentence. No greeting. No sign-off. Per federal compliance requirements, all programmatic changes must be PI certified before implementation. I hit send, closed my inbox, and that was it. No response. Not from legal. Not from HR. Certainly not from Darren. Just silence. Like a stage play where someone missed their cue. I watched the cursor blink for a while, wondering if they were scrambling or just clueless. Probably both. The thing is, that email, short as it was, wasn't a threat. It wasn't a protest. It was a reminder. A single pushpin holding the whole facade together. And if they ignored it, that was fine. Let them. I went back to my routine, showed up, attended meetings as the legacy advisor, sat quietly while consultants talked in circles, gave polite nods when someone asked for my historical context. They thought they'd reduced me to a museum exhibit, something dusty and safe, contained behind a velvet rope. But I wasn't gone. I was watching. And more importantly, the systems were still mine. Darren started issuing directives that had nowhere to land. Staff hesitated. Is this approved yet? They'd ask. Is legal looped in? No one knew. Because no one could track the chain of compliance, not even Darren. They'd removed the wrong link. Thought they were cutting dead weight. Didn't realize they'd amputated the central nerve. But I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I felt invisible, but not powerless. There's a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated, like walking through fog with a torch no one sees. And as I walked the halls of my own division like a ghost, I started noticing the cracks widening. A vendor called to ask about missing invoice codes. A program partner emailed HR in confusion after their liaison stopped responding. The monthly impact report Darren tried to send out got bounced by the federal system. He marked it as technical issues. And yet still, they acted like I was the one being phased out. Let them. They were steering a car with the steering wheel already in my desk drawer. All I had to do was wait for the wall. I didn't schedule the call with the agency's liaison out of spite. I did it because it was due. Performance reports don't submit themselves, and Darren clearly wasn't going to do it. He probably assumed some intern in a WeWork hoodie was handling it on a Google Sheet. But this wasn't a Slack emoji kind of process. This was a federal platform with session timeouts and digital keychains older than his leadership career. Just updating records, I told Marcia, the grant liaison I'd worked with through 2 renewals and 1 government shutdown. Her voice came through steady as ever, warm but formal. I noticed the reporting calendar hadn't been adjusted to reflect the new program year. Thought I'd step in before it flagged us for noncompliance. "Oh, thank God you're still in there," she said, without missing a beat. "We've been getting incomplete uploads and some garbled drafts from someone, but they weren't in the system as an authorized signer, so we've been rejecting them." I smiled without smiling. "Well," I said, "I figured I'd clean up the queue." She paused, then said carefully, "Linda, are you still officially in charge?" I didn't lie. "As far as the system's concerned," I said, "nothing's changed." That wasn't me being slick. That was the literal truth. The transition paperwork hadn't been submitted. The compliance portal still had me listed as principal investigator, and the most recent key fob login attached to my badge. Darren had tried to bypass it, probably by having his shiny new operations lead register an account, but the system auto-rejected her credentials with the note, "Unauthorized party." No PI transfer documented. I submitted the overdue Q2 performance report that afternoon, attached the backup metrics, signed it, dated it, clicked submit. Status, accepted. Green checkmark. Agency receipt confirmed. That's when I logged into the internal dashboard, the one Darren didn't even know existed because it wasn't built into the company's flashy new intranet. It was a legacy system tied to federal audit logs, buried deep in the weeds. I clicked on the User Access tab. Darren's name appeared, grayed out. Status, unauthorized attempted logins. 4. Last attempted action. Modify funding recipient profile. System response. Action denied. PI override required. I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't just a ghost in their machine. I was the machine. And they were poking buttons without a manual, hoping it didn't blow up in their face. Darren had no idea. He still walked around the office like a man preparing to take a victory lap. Still held pulse meetings with staff where he talked about culture shifts and mindset pivots. Still dropped phrases like mission realignment and values architecture, as if stringing nouns together made them real. Meanwhile, I updated the compliance calendar, cleaned up the training logs, and added my initials to every key field. Quiet, methodical maintenance. Nothing dramatic, just checking wires in a box they didn't even know was plugged in. The staff who still came to me, I didn't offer comfort. I offered clarity. Check your position's funding source, I'd say, or, has Darren issued any PI-certified directives lately? They got the hint. A few even started pushing back in meetings. Not loudly, not with rebellion, but with questions. Has this been cleared with compliance? Is this aligned with our grant scope? And every time Darren would wave his hand like a man allergic to accountability. We're modernizing that, he'd say. We'll streamline the old stuff. But the old stuff, me, was still in control. And the stream he was trying to modernize, it flowed directly through my login. Every disbursement, every approval, every access credential tied to our federal footprint. I didn't gloat. I didn't strut. I just watched. Because soon, very soon, someone was going to realize we'd hit the end of the rope. And when they looked down, they'd see it was me holding the scissors. The founder returned with a cane and silence. Nobody expected him to show up at the Relaunch the Future event Darren had orchestrated like a TED Talk bred with a self-help cult. There was branded swag, a dry erase mural titled Dream Wall, and catered wraps no one touched. But there he was, at the back of the room, leaning slightly on polished mahogany, and wearing that same expression he'd had the day he walked me through my first budget approval. Quiet, unreadable, a little too still. Darren didn't notice. He was too busy narrating his own hero's journey into transformational disruption. Slide after slide burst onto the screen. Color gradients, abstract pyramids, screenshots of Slack channels like they were holy relics. I stood off to the side, just outside the splash zone, sipping lukewarm coffee and waiting for the air to shift. It didn't take long. Midway through Darren's bit about shattering legacy frameworks, the founder tilted his head. Just slightly. Just enough to let anyone watching know he was watching. He leaned toward the COO, who flinched like he'd forgotten the founder still had functioning vocal cords. Their conversation was barely a whisper, but I caught a few words. Org chart. Current structure. Grant file. The COO nodded and all but jogged out of the room, face pale as copier paper. Darren, oblivious, clicked to a slide titled Department 2.0, Fueling Impact Without Limits. It had a flaming arrow pointing upward through a bar graph that didn't cite any source. He raised his hand like he expected applause. He got a couple of pity claps and one half-hearted woo from Trent, who'd already reapplied hair gel twice during the presentation. I met the founder's eyes from across the room. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But something flickered. Recognition. Memory. And, beneath that, a spark of suspicion. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 months. He went on medical leave during the worst stretch of our restructuring chaos, right around when Darren was promoted from strategic advisor to director, because the board wanted fresh blood and thought mid-level tech charisma was a substitute for experience. The founder had been quiet, off-grid. Rumors were he'd stepped back permanently. But there he was, in the room, watching the circus. The COO returned about 10 minutes later, carrying 2 folders like they were radioactive. He didn't hand them to Darren. He took them directly to the founder, who sat down in one of the back chairs with all the fanfare of a man about to grade a very disappointing term paper. Darren kept talking. He wrapped up with a dramatic flourish about erasing the walls between vision and execution, completely unaware that a man was literally flipping through documentation that showed just how much of that execution was built on sand. The founder raised one eyebrow, asked the COO something. The COO blanched. Then the founder closed the folder slowly, precisely, looked up again, this time straight at me. And I knew. He'd seen it. The PI designation, the untouched grant portal, the signature line with my name on every renewal form. He'd seen everything Darren hadn't bothered to read. I set my coffee down, straightened my blazer, felt the heat rise beneath my skin, but not from panic, from pressure. The kind you feel right before the dam breaks, because I wasn't the only one holding the truth now, and someone with actual power had just picked up the matchbook. The conference room had that pre-storm pressure in the air, fake cheerful lighting, tension pretending to be structure. I wasn't supposed to be there. The invite had gone to active leadership only, but someone, maybe the founder himself, maybe his assistant with a long memory, had tacked my name on as a legacy observer, a polite euphemism for ghost. I took a seat in the corner, no placard, no eye contact, just me, a notebook, and a pen that clicked louder than anyone liked. Darren sat at the head of the table like he'd earned it, expensive pen in hand, collar crisp, smirk dialed just shy of smug. Around him, senior staff, a few board observers, legal and HR looked mildly sedated. He opened with his usual, a monologue laced with business jargon, promising seamless forward motion and next phase deliverables. No one interrupted, not even when he said, "As you all know, Linda has transitioned out of operations, and I've assumed oversight of all active funding streams." He didn't glance my way. That was his tell. He avoided what he feared. 10 minutes in, the founder leaned forward. Slow, intentional, the kind of movement that draws eyes without asking. He held up a document. Plain, 3-hole punched. The grant agreement. "I've been reviewing this," he said, voice smooth as gravel. "Specifically, the renewal addendum signed 3 months ago." Darren paused, blinked like a man registering a sudden itch in his brain. "Yes, we're aware of the renewal." "Are you?" The founder flipped the document open, held up a page like it was evidence in a courtroom. "There's only one active PI listed here." Silence. Then he turned to Darren, eyes flat. "And it isn't you." The room shifted like a tablecloth had just been yanked out from under lunch. Darren frowned, forcing a chuckle. I'm not sure what that means in practical terms." The founder didn't smile. It means your position has no legal access to the division's funds, or its staff. Dead air. The CFO cleared his throat, leaned forward. Is that accurate? The founder turned the document around so everyone could see the line. Principal Investigator, Linda Carpenter. He looked at me for the first time. Linda, can you confirm whether any PI transition paperwork has been submitted to the agency? I didn't raise my voice, didn't smile, just answered like I was reading from a recipe. No, no transition has been filed. I remain the sole credentialed party for federal access. All changes require my certification. None have been given. HR shifted uncomfortably. Legal looked like someone had slipped them a shot of bleach. Darren let out a short breath. I was under the impression that... You were under the impression, the founder interrupted, that we could restructure a federally funded division without honoring the compliance structure that binds the funding. That was your impression? No one moved. Not a single person. The CFO reached for his tablet, checking something. Then he froze. Our internal system shows disbursements pending for Q3 and Q4, but none of them have PI certification. The founder leaned back. So what happens now? I responded calmly. Any unauthorized expenditure puts us at risk for agency audit, grant suspension, and repayment of federal funds. Darren turned pale. Wait, are you saying... I'm saying, I said, you've been managing a department you have no legal access to, and assigning staff to roles that aren't supported by the grant. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." The founder closed the folder, set it on the table like a gavel. Until this is resolved, he said, no structural changes move forward. No new roles, no disbursements, no public communications. He paused, looked straight at Darren. You've been playing with matches next to a fireworks factory. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to speak, because every eye in that room had already turned to me, not with pity or nostalgia, but recognition. The ghost in the system had a name again. The founder's eyes never left me. Still seated, still composed, but everything in his posture had shifted. Gravity pulled toward him now, not Darren. He tapped a finger against the folder. Linda, he said, his voice low but unmistakably clear, would you care to explain Appendix D? I didn't rush. I didn't clear my throat or pretend to act surprised. I just stepped forward, heels echoing on the tile like punctuation marks. The room tracked me like a heat signature. Appendix D, I said calmly, outlines disbursement freeze procedures in the event of unauthorized role changes or oversight breaches. I could see legal sit straighter, flipping pages fast. The founder just nodded, like he'd already known. This was confirmation, a formality. I continued, voice steady. If a listed principal investigator is removed or their authority bypassed without filed transition documents, the grant automatically enters a compliance hold. All associated disbursements, reimbursements, and staff allocations are frozen until resolution. Legal suddenly stood, muttering something sharp into the CEO's ear. And if attempted expenditures occur during that hold, I added, they are flagged for federal review. That includes salary payments from grant-funded lines. Darren snapped, This is bureaucratic nonsense. We've been operating. The work is getting done. You think the agency cares about some formatting on a portal? They do, said the CFO, cutting him off without looking up from his screen. His voice was flat, final. She's the PI. The system won't release funds for the next cycle unless she certifies. Darren's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Just the hiss of air leaking from a balloon that thought it was a blimp. Silence clamped around the room. The founder stood. He walked slowly to the front, picked up the folder one last time, then turned, deliberately, to face Darren. So, he said, gaze like a scalpel, do you still think her position is obsolete? Darren's smirk finally cracked. He opened his mouth, closed it. Color drained from his face as if someone had pulled the contrast slider all the way down. He didn't answer. And I didn't offer him a rope. I just reached for my binder, tucked it under my arm. No dramatic speech, no farewell tour. Just the quiet authority of a woman who'd done the work, kept the receipts, and waited for the circus to collapse under its own incompetence. As I walked out, no one tried to stop me. The founder didn't. Legal didn't. Even HR stayed frozen, eyes fixed on the table like it might open up and swallow them. I reached the door, paused for half a second, then stepped through without looking back. Because the thing about ghosts, eventually they stop haunting and start owning.